The millionaire never visited her grave. Not once in 18 years. But the day he finally did, he saw a girl standing there in a white blouse, one who looked exactly like him. She whispered 4 words that shattered everything he thought he knew: "She was my mother." What came next unraveled the biggest secret of his life. Andrew Lawson had always been good at avoiding the past. He didn't dwell on memories or look back over his shoulder. That was how he'd built an empire: forward, always forward. He ran his life like a strategy game, calculated, controlled, impenetrable. And for 18 years, it had worked. 18 years of headlines, mergers, private jets, and a reputation so precise it was almost myth. But there was one place he had never gone, not once, not even out of curiosity: a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city where someone who once meant everything to him was buried beneath a name carved in stone. He hadn't been there when they lowered her into the ground. He hadn't sent flowers. He hadn't written a eulogy. He'd done what he did best: vanished behind work, ambition, silence. Cassandra Reeves had died in 2006, and Andrew had sealed that grief inside like a locked vault. For the world, she became a forgotten chapter. For him, she was a ghost he never dared face. But something about this summer morning was different. Maybe it was the way the air felt too still, or how the sky looked too bright for the heaviness in his chest. Maybe he was just tired of pretending. Whatever the reason, he found himself behind the wheel of his own car, driving without telling anyone where he was going. No driver. No assistant. No suit. Just a man, finally making a visit he should have made long ago. The cemetery was nearly empty. Grass gently swayed in the breeze, and the path curved between rows of headstones, each one with its own quiet story. He hadn't needed directions. He knew exactly where she was. He walked without hurry, his footsteps steady but slow, like each one took something out of him. Her grave was simple. A small white stone with her name, birthdate, and the year she left the world. No epigraph. Just her name, Cassandra Reeves, and a silence that settled over him like dust. He stood there for a long time, not knowing what to say. Not even sure why he came. Then he saw her. A girl, maybe 17 or 18, standing just a few steps away. She wore a white blouse, loose around the shoulders, her dark hair falling down her back in soft waves. She wasn't crying. She was just there. Still. Focused. She knelt to adjust a bouquet of wildflowers resting at the base of the stone, then placed her hand gently on the top of the marker as if it were familiar. Intimate. Something in Andrew's chest tightened. When she turned and looked at him, it hit harder than any business loss, harder than betrayal or heartbreak or regret. Because he wasn't just looking at a stranger. He was looking at someone with his eyes. She stared at him, her gaze calm but curious, and for a moment, time stopped. Andrew couldn't move. He couldn't speak. His world, so tightly built, so carefully preserved, cracked like glass under pressure. And then she spoke. Her voice was soft, but firm. She was my mother. It didn't register at first. The words floated in the air between them, and Andrew tried to make sense of them, as if his brain refused to connect the pieces. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but she had already turned away. She walked down the path with a kind of peace that made the moment feel even more unreal. And he was left standing at a grave he had avoided for nearly 2 decades, staring after a girl who looked just like him. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she lived, what she believed, or what she had been told. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. That girl was his. Andrew didn't remember walking back to his car. He didn't remember the gravel crunching under his shoes or the way the summer heat clung to his skin. His mind was a blur of fragmented thoughts and impossible realizations, looping on the same image over and over: the girl's face, her voice, the calm way she said the words, "She was my mother." It echoed inside his chest with the weight of a truth he hadn't even begun to understand. He sat behind the wheel for nearly an hour, unmoving, staring at the steering wheel as if it might provide an answer. He couldn't drive away. Not yet. Not until he knew what any of this meant. Eventually, he pulled out his phone and opened a private contact he hadn't used in years, someone from his legal team who specialized in quiet background investigations. When the man answered, Andrew didn't waste time on greetings. He gave him the name, Skye Winters. He didn't know how he knew it was hers, but he was certain. Something about her presence at that grave hadn't felt random. It had felt anchored, like she belonged there. And when he'd looked into her eyes, his eyes, he knew this wasn't coincidence. Later that night, Andrew returned to his apartment, though it didn't feel like home. The skyline through his windows glittered like always, but there was a sharp emptiness in it now, as if something had shifted in the structure of the world and he was just beginning to notice the cracks. He poured himself a glass of scotch, but it sat untouched on the counter while he stood at the window, replaying the scene at the cemetery in his mind. He remembered Cassandra's smile. Her laugh. The way she used to hum when she was nervous. And then he thought of what she must have carried alone. Pregnant. Alone. Gone before he even knew. He had spent so many years being angry at her for leaving, never knowing she had stayed long enough to bring someone else into the world. The next morning, his investigator called. The girl's name was indeed Skye Winters. 18 years old. Born in late summer, just a few months after Cassandra's accident. Raised in a small town outside the city by a woman named Sarah Winters, who had officially adopted her as an infant. No record of the father. No public custody battle. No newspaper stories. Just a quiet life. Private school. Honors student. Talented in music. Planning to study composition. There were no red flags, no hidden scandals, just a girl living a life she had been given, entirely unaware that her very existence was about to upend someone else's. Andrew didn't hesitate. He needed to see her again. Not through a file. Not through photographs. In person. But he also knew that showing up at her door uninvited would only raise more questions, maybe even fear. So he called in a favor from a friend who sat on the board of a nearby arts college where she had recently applied. With a few quiet calls, he learned that she spent her afternoons volunteering at a local youth center, teaching kids how to play piano. She hadn't listed it on any application. It was something she did on her own. That said more to him than anything else in her file. The next day, he walked into the center just before sunset, dressed simply, no tailored suit, no security detail, no watch worth more than most people's rent. He wanted to be no one. Just a man looking for answers. She was there, sitting at a dusty upright piano surrounded by children. Her back was straight, her fingers moving gently over the keys, guiding a small boy through a clumsy rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." She looked at home there. Focused. Alive. He waited until the children had been picked up and she was gathering her things. When she noticed him, her eyes narrowed slightly with recognition but not fear. Just curiosity. "You followed me," she said. It wasn't an accusation. Just a fact. "I had to," Andrew replied quietly. "I think you know why." She paused, her hands resting on the piano. Then she spoke, slower this time, as if testing each word before letting it go. "Did you know her? My mother?" "I did," he said. "I loved her." A long silence stretched between them. Skye looked down, fiddling with a set of sheet music, her expression unreadable. "I always wondered," she said softly. She didn't talk about him. "I asked once. She said he wasn't ready. I didn't know if that meant he didn't want me. Or if he didn't know." "I didn't know," Andrew said. "Not until yesterday." She looked at him then, really looked. And now that you do? He didn't have a perfect answer. He didn't have a polished speech. All he could offer was the truth. I'm here. And she nodded, just once. Not in forgiveness. Not in acceptance. But maybe, a beginning. Skye didn't ask him to leave, but she didn't invite him to stay either. After a moment of silence, she gathered her things, slung a canvas bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the door of the music room. Andrew followed, a few steps behind, unsure of what came next but unwilling to let the moment slip away. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot outside. They walked side by side without speaking, the air between them thick with unspoken questions and a strange, fragile tension that neither of them knew how to name. At the edge of the lot, she finally stopped and turned to him. Her expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't open either. It was cautious, the way someone looks at a stranger who might be something more. I don't know what you want from me, she said quietly. I don't even know who you are, not really. I don't want anything, Andrew said, his voice softer than he expected. I'm not here to interfere with your life, or take anything away from you. I needed to see you. I needed to know you were real. She looked away, watching a car pull out of the lot, headlights cutting across the pavement. So what now? She asked. You show up, tell me you loved my mom, that you didn't know about me, and then what? We pretend we're a family? You start sending birthday cards? Is that the plan? Her words weren't cruel, but they hit him harder than anything he'd heard in years. Because he knew she wasn't wrong to question him. He had no roadmap for this. No idea how to suddenly become something in her life when he hadn't even been a name in it before yesterday. I don't have a plan, he admitted. But I want to be honest with you. I didn't know about you, not until I saw you standing at her grave. And when I did, everything inside me shifted. I know that doesn't mean much to you right now, but it's the truth. Skye nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. She used to sing when she cooked, she said suddenly. Not real songs. Just made up little melodies. Sometimes she'd hum the same tune over and over for weeks until it drove me crazy. And then she'd switch to something else. I never understood why, but I miss it now. Andrew's chest tightened. He could hear it in his mind, the sound of Cassandra humming while stirring something on the stove, the quiet rhythm of her voice filling the apartment they used to share. She always hummed when she was nervous, he said. Or when she was thinking about something she couldn't say out loud. Skye looked at him again, and this time there was something softer in her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But a flicker of connection. A thread. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, she said. It's like. I spent my whole life imagining who he was. Sometimes I thought he was dead. Other times I pictured someone awful, like a bad movie character. And now you're just, here. I'm not here to replace anything, Andrew said. I just want to know you, if that's something you're willing to let happen. She didn't answer. Not directly. But after a pause, she said, there's a coffee shop across the street. If you're not in a hurry. He wasn't. Not even a little. They sat in the corner of a quiet cafe for nearly an hour. She didn't tell him everything, and he didn't press. But he learned that she played guitar as well as piano. That she wrote music late at night when she couldn't sleep. That she hated math but loved astronomy. That her mother had died when she was 10 and that Sarah had done everything she could to keep her safe, loved, and curious. He told her little pieces too. That he wasn't good at relationships. That he built walls instead of bridges. That he had spent the past decade convincing himself that being alone was easier, safer, more productive. And that maybe, just maybe, he'd been completely wrong. When they left, the sky had turned violet, and the streetlights had flickered on. She didn't hug him. She didn't make any promises. But before walking away, she looked back over her shoulder and said, "I'll let you know if I want to talk again." And for the first time in years, Andrew felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Cassandra died. Hope. The days that followed were quiet in the kind of way that made everything feel more uncertain than calm. Andrew found himself checking his phone more than usual, reading and rereading their brief text exchange as if something new might appear each time. Sky hadn't reached out again since their talk at the cafe, but she hadn't shut the door either. And that, strangely, was enough to keep him anchored in a space between waiting and wondering. He didn't want to push her. He didn't want to make demands. She was 18. Her life was her own. But there was a new ache in his chest now, one he couldn't quite name, a mixture of guilt, longing, and the overwhelming realization of how much time he'd lost without even knowing it. He started waking up earlier, but not for meetings. His usual routine of back-to-back calls and filtered assistance felt hollow, and for the first time, he handed over entire blocks of his calendar to Monica with a simple request: make room. He didn't know what for. Just that his days needed air now, and not just deadlines. Late one afternoon, he drove back to the small town where Sarah and Sky lived. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't even know if he'd stop the car. But something about being closer helped him think. He ended up parked outside a modest white house with a narrow porch and faded green shutters. It was quiet. Peaceful. There were flower pots along the steps and a wind chime that clinked gently in the breeze. He hadn't planned to knock. But when the front door opened, Sarah stood there with a calm, tired expression, like she'd been expecting him all along. She didn't smile, but she didn't look surprised either. She gestured for him to come in, and without speaking, he followed. The house was simple but warm. Framed photos lined the walls, Sky at different ages, some with missing teeth, some with wild curls and paint-covered hands. It felt lived in, loved, like a real home. They sat at the kitchen table, a pot of tea between them. She poured him a cup without asking, then sat across from him with her hands folded. "I figured we'd have this conversation eventually," Sarah said quietly. "You didn't know." "I believe that. But now that you do, I have to ask, what are you looking for?" Andrew looked down at the steam rising from his cup before answering. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought I just wanted to see her, to know she was real. But now I can't stop thinking about the years I missed. About everything she's been through that I wasn't there for. I don't want to take anything from you. I want a chance to be in her life. Even a small part." Sarah nodded, her eyes steady. "She's not a little girl anymore. She doesn't need permission from me. She makes her own choices. But I'll tell you this, Cassandra loved her more than anything. And she did what she thought was right. She was scared. She didn't know if you'd reject the baby, and she didn't want her daughter growing up with that kind of pain. So she stayed quiet. When she died, I promised I'd protect Sky the best I could. That meant letting her believe what was simplest, that her mother made all the choices for a reason. That her father wasn't part of the story." Andrew swallowed hard. He imagined Cassandra alone, pregnant, hiding the truth because she thought he wouldn't want it. He had been so focused on his future back then, so obsessed with building his empire that he hadn't seen what he could have had. What had been just out of reach. "I never got to say goodbye," he said. "To Cassandra. I buried it all. And now there's this young woman who's part of me and I don't know how to start over. I don't even know how to start." Sarah's voice softened. "Then don't try to be a father right away. Don't show up with answers or plans. Just be there. Let her lead. Let her ask the questions. If she lets you in, it won't be because of what you say. It'll be because you stayed." The word stayed with him even after he left, driving back through dusk and into darkness. He didn't text Sky that night, but he wrote a message he didn't send. A message that said he was proud of her, even if he had no right to be yet. That he hoped one day she'd share her music with him. That he missed someone he'd only just begun to know. He deleted it before hitting send, but something had shifted. The silence between them didn't feel like distance anymore. It felt like the beginning of trust. 3 weeks passed before Sky reached out again. It came as a short message on a Sunday evening, long after Andrew had given up checking his phone with any real hope. The text simply read, *, would you come to my recital? *. It was followed by a time, a location, and nothing else. No greeting, no emoji, no explanation. And yet, Andrew stared at the message for almost 5 minutes before answering. Yes. I'll be there. It was the first invitation she'd offered him to be part of her world, and he treated it with the quiet weight of something sacred. The recital was being held in a small performance hall attached to the town's community college. He arrived early and sat near the back, not wanting to seem like he was pushing his way forward into something that wasn't yet his. The room was modest but filled with warmth, folding chairs lined in neat rows, a grand piano on stage, and a small printed program that listed Sky as the third performer of the evening. Her name sat simply between 2 others, unbolded, without fanfare, just Sky Winters, original composition. As the lights dimmed and the first student walked out to play, Andrew couldn't stop glancing down at her name, reading it again and again as if it would help him understand her better. It struck him then that he didn't know what kind of music she loved. He didn't know who her favorite composer was or how long she'd been writing songs. These small pieces of her life were still a mystery, and he hated how much of her past he'd already missed. When she finally walked out onto the stage, dressed in a simple black dress with her hair pulled back, he felt his breath catch in his throat. She looked calm, composed, but her fingers fidgeted slightly at her sides. She sat at the piano without looking at the audience and took a deep breath before playing. The first note was soft, hesitant, almost like a whisper. Then came the second. And the third. The melody unfolded gently at first, a slow cascade of chords that felt like rain on glass. It was haunting and delicate and painfully beautiful. There was sadness in it, yes, but there was also resilience, like the sound of someone learning to speak again after years of silence. Andrew didn't realize he was holding his breath until the final note faded and the room erupted into applause. Sky stood, nodded politely, and walked off stage with the same quiet grace she'd entered with. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look for him. But he clapped anyway, harder than anyone else in the room. After the recital ended, he waited near the exit, unsure if she would come find him or if this had simply been a test to see if he would show up at all. She emerged from the dressing area 20 minutes later, her coat slung over her arm, and stopped when she saw him. "You came," she said, her tone somewhere between surprise and relief. "Of course I did," he replied. They stood in silence for a moment while the last of the audience trickled out around them. Then she handed him a folded piece of paper. It was the sheet music to the song she'd just played. At the top, in pencil, she had written, "What I never said." He looked down at the page, stunned. "I wrote it last year," she said. "Before I knew who you were. I didn't know why I wrote it then. I do now." Andrew's voice was barely audible. "It was beautiful. I wasn't sure if I wanted you there," she admitted. "But I'm glad you came." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad you let me." They walked out into the cool night air together. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless talk. He let her lead. That had been Sarah's advice, and now he understood what she meant. Let her guide the steps, because every one she offered was a gift. As they reached her car, Sky stopped and looked up at him. "I'm not ready for everything," she said. "But maybe I'm ready for something." He smiled, Not wide, not triumphant, just a quiet curve of the lips that meant everything. Something is more than enough. She nodded, got into her car, and drove away. And Andrew stood there in the parking lot, holding the sheet music to a song written before she ever knew his name, knowing that somehow, against every odd, this was how their story had begun. Sky didn't text again for a week, but Andrew didn't take it as rejection. He understood now that her silence wasn't a wall, it was space. A way of processing. She moved carefully through her emotions, like someone who had spent years learning not to get too attached to what she couldn't count on. He didn't blame her. She had every right to be cautious with him. He had shown up out of nowhere, carrying a past she never asked for and a truth that had shifted the way she saw her own reflection. So he waited. Not because he had to, but because she was worth waiting for. During that week, Andrew found himself thinking about her constantly. He tried to stay busy, returning to work and handling the essentials, but everything that used to feel urgent now seemed distant. Board meetings felt more like noise. Deals he once would have fought for with sharp teeth now left him hollow. Something inside him had reoriented, and no one around him really understood it. Monica noticed, of course. She had been with him long enough to read his moods before he even voiced them. "You're quieter than usual," she said one afternoon as they reviewed logistics for a potential expansion. "Different." Andrew looked up from the table, considering how to respond. "I think I just, finally realized that what I'm building doesn't mean anything if I have no one to share it with." Monica raised an eyebrow. "Is this about her?" He didn't answer directly. He just nodded once, and she let it be. 2 days later, he received a message from Sky. It was brief, but this time it came with something more than words, a photo. She had taken a picture of the piano at her old high school's auditorium, dusty, a few chipped keys, but clearly loved. The message underneath read, "I used to stay after class to practice on this when I didn't want to go home. Thought you'd get why." Andrew stared at the image for a long time, running his thumb over the screen like he could reach through it. She was giving him pieces now. Small ones, yes, but pieces nonetheless. He replied with a photo of his old turntable, the one Cassandra used to tease him about for being too sentimental and scratched. Beneath it, he wrote, "She used to play records in the morning. Nina Simone. Joni Mitchell. Sometimes I just let it run without turning up the volume. I still do." She didn't answer right away, but the next day she sent him a voice memo, just a short recording of a melody she was working on, no lyrics, just soft chords on the guitar and a humming line that wrapped around itself like thread. He listened to it 5 times in a row, each time hearing something different. There was a sadness in it, but not defeat. It sounded like the beginning of something being rebuilt. That weekend, she asked if he'd meet her for lunch. Not coffee. Not just a quick check-in. Lunch. It was a subtle shift, but he felt it immediately. When he arrived at the small cafe she'd chosen, a place near a bookstore, tucked away behind blooming hedges, she was already there, waiting outside with her hair in a loose braid and a book clutched under one arm. He smiled as he approached, but didn't rush. She didn't like being overwhelmed, and he respected that. They sat at a quiet table near the window. She ordered tomato soup and a grilled cheese. He got the same, just to make her smirk. It worked. They talked about normal things, music she liked, professors she didn't, the strange way time moved during winter in small towns. Then, without warning, she looked up at him and said, "Do you think she would have told me eventually? If she hadn't died?" He didn't flinch. "Yes. She would have told you. I think she was trying to protect both of us, in the only way she knew how." Sky nodded slowly. She was good at that. At keeping things safe, even if it meant hurting herself. "She was," he said, his voice catching more than he wanted. "She protected me more than I deserved." Skye leaned back in her chair, sipping her drink. Sometimes I think I'm a little like her. But other times, I wonder if I'm more like you. Andrew's heart tightened at that. I hope you're the best of both of us. She looked at him thoughtfully. I think I might be. But I still have a lot to figure out. We can figure it out together, he said gently. One step at a time. She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no. When they left the cafe, the air had turned crisp, and she walked beside him without needing space between them. Just as they reached her car, she turned and handed him the book she'd been holding all along. It was a worn poetry collection with notes scribbled in the margins. Inside the cover, she had written just 2 words. Keep this. He didn't ask why. He didn't have to. It was her way of letting him in, not with grand declarations, but with something real. Something earned. And for the first time in a long time, Andrew Lawson felt like he belonged somewhere again. Winter arrived slowly that year, as if the season itself was hesitant to disturb the quiet rhythm Skye and Andrew had begun to build. Their meetings had become regular, but unspoken in schedule. Sometimes it was a shared lunch, other times it was just a few exchanged messages or voice notes about a new melody she was working on, or a photo he'd found of Cassandra smiling in an old sunlit apartment. The connection between them was cautious but real, stitched together by vulnerability and small acts of trust. They didn't talk about what they were yet. Neither of them was ready to define it. But it was growing, and both of them knew it. One cold Saturday morning, Skye invited him to her apartment for the first time. It was small, second floor, with creaky wooden floors and a window that let in more wind than light. But it was hers. There were guitar picks scattered across a desk, post-it notes on the walls with half-written lyrics, and a shelf filled with books that had clearly been read more than once. Her life was carefully built around art, music, and quiet independence. It was nothing like the penthouse Andrew lived in, and he realized how little of his home felt personal in comparison. She made coffee, strong and slightly burnt, and they sat on the couch, knees almost touching. A record player in the corner played something lo-fi and gentle. She didn't speak right away, just watched him glance around the room as if trying to memorize it. I used to think about this, she said finally. What it would feel like if he ever showed up. If I'd let him in here, into this space that's only ever been mine. Andrew didn't respond right away. He knew better now than to fill her silences with noise. Instead, he waited. I thought I'd be angry, she continued. That I'd slam the door and tell him he didn't get to just walk into my life because he finally decided he wanted to. But now, I don't know. It's like I'm angry at someone who doesn't even exist. The version I made up in my head. You're not him. I'm not sure who I am yet, Andrew admitted, voice low. But I want to be someone worth knowing. She looked at him then, not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet analysis, like she was still fitting puzzle pieces together in her mind. You know, for a billionaire, you're really bad at resting. He smiled faintly. I never learned how. Well, she said, you're sitting on my lopsided couch drinking coffee I probably burned. That's a start. She got up and walked to her desk, rummaging through a drawer before pulling out an envelope. When she returned, she handed it to him and sat back down, arms crossed tightly over her chest as if bracing for impact. I found this last week, she said. In a box of her old stuff I hadn't looked through in years. It's addressed to you. I didn't read it. I thought you should be the one. Andrew stared at the envelope in his hands. His name was written in Cassandra's familiar script, the ink slightly faded but unmistakable. He turned it over slowly, hesitating. Part of him wasn't sure he was ready to read anything from her again. Another part had waited 18 years for this. He opened it. The letter was short. Simple. But every word carried weight. Cassandra had written it not long before the accident. She'd known she was pregnant. She'd been scared. But she'd also said something that caught in his throat, if you're reading this, I hope she's found you. And I hope you let her be everything she was meant to be, not because she's yours, but because she's hers. He read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. When he looked up, Sky was watching him closely, but not with pity. Just presence. She never hated you, Sky said softly. She just didn't want you to feel trapped. She didn't think you were ready. I wasn't, he said. But I would have tried. I wish she'd let me try. I think you're trying now, Sky replied. And that's more than most people ever do. That night, as snow began to fall outside, they made dinner together. It was chaotic, slightly undercooked, and absolutely perfect in its imperfections. She laughed when he dropped a spoon into the sauce. He laughed when she burned the garlic bread. And for the first time since she'd stepped into his life, the tension between them dissolved into something easier. Something lighter. Afterward, they sat on the couch again, shoulder to shoulder, the warmth of the room closing around them like a soft promise. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. And when Andrew finally left hours later, stepping out into the quiet snow, he didn't feel like a visitor anymore. He felt like someone who had been given a second chance, and this time, he didn't plan to waste it. Spring came early that year. The snow melted quickly, and the air turned soft with warmth, the kind that didn't announce itself but lingered on the skin just long enough to feel like hope. Andrew had always measured time in quarters and fiscal years, in deadlines and launches. But now, time felt different. It passed in music notes and walks through bookstores, in phone calls that didn't start with business and in dinners that didn't end with strategy. For the first time in years, his life wasn't about control, it was about presence. Sky had grown more comfortable with him. There was still space between them, but it no longer felt like a wall. It was simply part of the rhythm they'd created. They saw each other often, sometimes just to sit in silence while she practiced guitar or worked through lyrics. She didn't feel the need to entertain him, and he didn't feel the need to impress her. That alone was its own kind of intimacy. And Andrew found himself laughing more than he ever had before, not polite, performative laughter, but deep, real moments of joy that surprised even him. One Saturday, she invited him to a performance at a community fundraiser. It wasn't a formal event, just a small gathering in a local park where local artists and musicians played to raise money for a youth arts program. Sky had volunteered to play a few original songs. He arrived early, like he always did now, and sat in the middle row of folding chairs scattered across the lawn. The sun was warm on his face, and children ran between the trees while volunteers set up tables of snacks and flyers. It was chaotic and joyful, and Andrew found himself wishing Cassandra could see it. Not for his sake, but for Sky's. When Sky walked onto the small stage, she didn't look at him right away. She adjusted the mic, tuned her guitar quickly, and smiled into the sunlight. Then she began to play. Her voice was stronger now, confident but still raw, filled with honesty that couldn't be taught. Each note felt like a step she had taken on her own, each lyric a choice she had made to be seen. The last song she performed was new, one he hadn't heard before, and she introduced it only with the words, "This is for someone I didn't expect to find." It was a quiet melody, simple and stripped back. The lyrics spoke of time lost, of questions left unanswered, but also of choosing to begin anyway. It wasn't a love song in the traditional sense. It was a recognition, a moment offered to someone who had arrived late but stayed. Andrew listened with his eyes closed, and when the final chord faded, he opened them to find her looking straight at him. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the volunteers had begun packing up, Sky walked toward him with her guitar slung over her shoulder and a quiet, almost shy smile on her face. He stood as she approached, unsure what to say, but she beat him to it. "I want you to meet Sarah," she said. "The woman who raised me." He nodded. "I'd like that." They drove together to the house Andrew had visited once before, only this time, he was welcomed in not as a stranger, but as something closer to family. Sarah greeted him with a nod and a cup of tea, and the three of them sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. They talked about Cassandra, stories both painful and beautiful, things she used to say, the way she could make any room feel like home. There were tears, yes, but laughter too. And by the end of the evening, it no longer felt like something broken they were trying to fix. It felt like something new they were building together. A few weeks later, on Sky's birthday, Andrew gave her a gift he had debated over for months. It wasn't expensive, at least not in his world. Just a handmade leather-bound notebook, with blank pages and a small inscription on the inside cover that read, *, write the songs only you can write. *. She opened it slowly, ran her fingers over the leather, and looked at him with a softness in her eyes that said more than thank you ever could. "I'm not done figuring things out," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "I'm not either." That evening, she played a song just for him. No microphone, no audience. Just the two of them in her apartment, sitting on the floor with the lights low and the windows open. And when she finished, she didn't say anything more. She just leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let her stay there, breathing in the moment like it was something fragile and rare. For the first time in a long time, Andrew didn't feel like a man trying to make up for lost time. He felt like a father. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the way that mattered most. She had found him. And he had stayed. What makes the ending of this story powerful isn't that everything wraps up neatly, but that it chooses honesty over perfection. Andrew doesn't become a flawless father overnight, and Sky doesn't suddenly forget the years of silence and absence. But they meet each other where they are, two people from different worlds, connected by blood, pain, and possibility. There's beauty in the slow, quiet building of trust, in the choice to stay present even when it's uncomfortable. The ending reminds us that love doesn't always begin at birth. Sometimes, it begins in the middle of life, unexpectedly, and still has the power to grow into something real. It's not about rewriting the past, it's about honoring it, learning from it, and deciding to show up better tomorrow. And that, to me, is what redemption truly looks like.